I'm Michael Marsh, and I started this program many years ago for the purpose of reestablishing constitutional government. And this being the election season, I'm going to do what I always do in election seasons, invite various candidates on of different parties so they can tell you what they plan to do. And in this case, I'm going to be a candidate for Secretary of State by the time this program airs. And my guest, Zundel, is already a candidate on the Pacific Green Party. And he's here to tell you what his plans for the for Secretary of State's office, and I'll tell you why I'm running and what my plans are. Okay, Alan, why are you running for Secretary of State? Did you pick that office?
Yeah, as I was telling you earlier, I've been following politics, studying it and teaching it for most of my professional career. I used to be a political scientist at a university, and I became concerned with the state of our public policies and also with the state of government, and I saw problems coming. My concern only grew over the years, and I decided I wanted to do something more directly to make a difference. More recently, it seemed like a good opportunity came up, and the Secretary of State office was a really appropriate one, because I think before any other significant changes can happen, we need to change the way we conduct elections. We end up being herded into two large parties which don't satisfy all the voters. More and more people have been disaffiliating from those parties, yet they still exist and they still exert pressure on people to choose from among them instead of others. There's reasons for that, and there's things we could change to make it different. We could have more freedom to choose from various candidates, independent candidates, or from other parties such as your Constitutionalist party or our own Pacific Green Party, without worrying about this so-called spoiler dilemma that you're going to take away the chances of some other candidate, which may be your second or even third choice, and bring in this someone you like the least. This year we're seeing the two major parties with major fault lines being exhibited, and I think it has turned out to be the best possible year to be raising this issue of election reform.
Yeah, one of my goals, if I'm elected, is there are two laws that were passed by Kate Brown that I want to repeal. The first one allows the county clerks to keep the ballots after the election's over. And that kind of lends itself to voter fraud. And the other one is they automatically enrolling people as registered voters at the DMV, which gives the county clerks more people they can write in now. And both of these laws lend themselves to voter fraud, and I think both of these laws need to be repealed.
I would go even further than that. I would do away with what's usually called the winner-take-all or first-past-the-post election system, in which people vote and whoever gets the most votes wins, even if that candidate doesn't get the majority of votes. And that's the main reason people feel constrained to only pick from two candidates, even if they're not candidates that would be their first choice. So what I'd like to see implemented is something called ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting, where you would rank candidates in the order you really prefer them. This is my true first choice. This would be my second choice in case nobody wins, and so on. And a candidate would have to get a majority of first place votes to win, unlike now where somebody can actually get in with less than a majority. So it doesn't leave much opportunity for candidates outside the two major parties who rely a lot on campaign contributions to keep themselves in the forefront, and it tends to weed out people that don't have those financial resources.
And some of the southern states, like Louisiana, has a runoff. Some of them have runoffs. You know, if nobody gets the majority, then the two top ones would, and I can see the advantage of that.
I can see the appeal of it. My problem with it is that if you have a lot of candidates, the top two may not be the most popular.
Yeah.
They could just be people with a really intense minority of loyal voters, like a neo-Nazi party. If they come in with 20% or so, and there's so many candidates, everybody else comes with 19, they're going to be in the top two, and it doesn't give you a lot of choice. So in general, I like to see somebody win with majority support, which I think ranked choice voting would do.
Yeah. One thing, and I'm not really sure how I would fix it. Like over the years, especially it's important that, like if you're running for a legislature or county commissioner or something like that, by the time you actually reach people, a lot of times they'll say, I like what you're saying, but I've already voted.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not really sure how I would fix that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a vote by mail state, and they do send out the ballots a couple of weeks earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's part of the marginalization of third parties. All the attention is on the primaries for the major parties, and by the time the general election is getting near, people are really familiar with them, and they feel like they're the only realistic candidates. So by the time candidates like us come into the race, we have to break that barrier of lack of media attention and voter unfamiliarity just to start to get a hearing. And if you have the mail-in ballots like we do, it means we have even less time to make our case to the voters.
Yeah. Now, Secretary of State's office is really pretty much an administrative position.
Yeah.
And one of the major reasons I decided to run, was Brad Avakian, as the head of labor and industry. He did a lot of arbitrary and unconstitutional fines, probably the most famous of which was the Gresham couple and not wanting to make a wedding cake for a lesbian couple. And whatever you think of the gay marriage issue, that's not relevant. The $135,000 fine, which is an arbitrary figure, and the Oregon Constitution says anything over $5,000, you have the right to a jury trial. There was no jury trial offered. It was just some bureaucrat decided arbitrarily, oh, we'll give you this fine. And while he's not supposed to, he shouldn't, if he's doing the job honestly, he can't really do a whole lot of damage because, like I said, it's an administrative position. But if he's going to be going into these various, like the corporate division and land use board, and just arbitrarily making rules and trying to destroy companies and everything, he could do a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of my main concerns. For instance, okay, I'm pro-life, but if I'm doing the job honestly of Secretary of State, that's really irrelevant because that's, it would be relevant if I was running for legislature because they could do something. But Secretary of State, I'm just going to be administrating things, and that issue doesn't come up one way or the other. But I'm afraid that Brad Avakian would bring up issues that and try to hurt people of views that are different than his, and misuse the Secretary of State's office could do some damage. But if there's an honest person running it, it's going to be for the benefit of the people of Oregon. Where do you see the position?
Well, I agree with you. It's primarily an administrative position, and the people there are, I hope, pretty competent to do their jobs without a lot of new policies and ideas being brought in that aren't relevant to their job description. At the same time, the Secretary of State has a lot of powers.
Yeah.
Those are the appropriate powers, and the reason I am focusing on election reform, Secretary of State can't single-handedly achieve election reform, but they do have a platform to speak about the issue and to bring it to the legislature as something to address. Beyond that, they also do the certification of voting machines, and they have some role over determining what kind of machines get used. I would like to make sure those machines are safe, secure, and not as costly as buying them from for-profit vendors whose computer code we can't even look at to see how they're running or how they're counting the votes. They may be susceptible to hacking for all we know. So that's one area where the Secretary of State does have some influence. There's also others, like he or she is on the land board, so there's some influence there. And they run the auditing section. They have some influence where they could take a public audit, say, and try to publicize it a little more if they think the legislature is failing to address the problems identified. But I agree with you, they should limit their role to what the Secretary of State is empowered to do, which is to use it as a platform to raise issues relevant to that office and to exercise the powers that are given to that office.
Yeah, and there are powers, but my fear of Brad Avakian is that he's going to abuse those powers, just like he did at labor and industry. And you're right, it's mostly the platform, you got a chance to go to the legislature on these. For instance, the two laws that I said need to be repealed, Kate Brown pushed them through when she was Secretary of State. But she pushed them through the legislature. And and that would be my goal, to go to the legislature and say, these are bad ideas, let's repeal them.
Yeah.
How do you see your role as on the land use board?
It depends on the decisions that are up. In general, my take on it is that I'd like to see public concern about climate change and preserving not national, but natural resources. And so my decisions would come into it with that point of view. I'm willing to give a fair hearing to all parties when we're trying to determine what's going on. But I want to make sure that interests that are not always at the table because they don't have the money or the organization to bring them to the table are. I realize there's a lot of environmental groups that are active on this, and I want to give everyone a fair hearing. That's my particular point of view, but I'm willing to listen.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I would probably, when Oregon was set up, they set land aside to finance the state. There was no income tax or sales tax or anything like that. And the government was supposed to be self-sufficient. It wasn't, people were to be left alone to, be prosperous. I would probably use our natural resources a little more than what they are. I mean, you have to be careful. You can't just cut every tree in Oregon.
I hope not.
I wouldn't be in favor of that. But I would be willing to cut some, and, it can be replanted.
Well, they have private land to do that too. I'm not sure that it's necessary to use public lands for that. But the law, I mean, obviously, it would have to be changed in order to do some of what I'm talking about. It's not favorable to preservation in some ways, so that's something that has to be considered. But what these things were set up to do 100 years ago is not necessarily the best thing today, but it does take a change of law to make sure that's changed. There's a role for private industry, obviously. There's also a role for public ownership of assets and using them in ways that make sense today as opposed to 100 years ago or even 50 years ago.
Well, I'm definitely, when we use the public lands, the resources that are, like I said, they were set aside for the public use. And while I'm willing to use it, it does have to be for the public benefit. For instance, one of the issues they brought up was for education, to pay for education. And I would definitely make sure that the money was going to education and various other state entities, that it would be for the public benefit. It wouldn't just be letting somebody from private industry come in and use, like cut down some lumber and make a profit and just go on their way, they would have to, be paying for it. And the money would go into the to the state and for public benefit, the benefit of the people of Oregon.
And I think if that happens, the price should be fairly arrived at and not undercount the contribution to something like climate change. Whether somebody believes that's real or not, it's important enough to take seriously and think about what are the other benefits of having public lands devoted to forestry. And if we're accepting the selling of these lands to private interests, let's make sure that we are considering what they are really worth and not just running into this because we think it's going to save some jobs that it may not save. I mean, logging is highly automated now, the way it wasn't 40 years ago, and they talk about jobs, but I'm not sure those jobs are all going to materialize the way they say.
Yeah, and there would definitely be a replanting program, very heavily into the replanting. And, the younger trees, as they're growing, they do bring in the carbon dioxide and beneficial.
So on those questions, I would, try to look at all sides of it and make a decision that's to the best, both economically and in terms of concerns about preserving natural resources, climate change, and all the other considerations that I think we really should be keeping in mind.
Yeah. Now, I guess it was 2 sessions back, the legislature passed the bill to make 10% of the gasoline biodegradable or biofuels, using that, which helps an out-of-state corporation that just happened to be paying the then governor's fiance. So if something like this were to come up, would you support that? Would you use your platform to support something like that, or would you say, let's think about this?
It wouldn't be one of my priorities because I don't see it as falling within the Secretary of State's orbit so much. But I'm not an expert on this, but I don't think biofuels are necessarily efficient ways of fuel. I'd lean more towards renewable energy sources rather than biofuels. I think part of the reason they get stressed is because there's people who are making money off of it. Obviously, especially when the presidential campaigns, they have to think about votes in Iowa and places like that where they're raising the corn for biofuels instead of feeding people or animals or whatever else they could be doing.
And personally, I like to eat.
Eating is good. Breathing too.
So, what do you think? Okay, now as public lands, I know some of the lands they have. I'm not really a big fan of the turbines for wind. For one thing, they kill birds, and I'm not sure they're all that efficient. And solar energy is okay for smaller units, like maybe a house, but they don't seem to be ready for providing energy for a city. But there is geothermal activity in some of the areas, like the southern Oregon. I would not, in fact, I would be in favor of using that on our public land on the geothermal side. I would probably oppose the others.
Geothermal and tides and things like that are obviously worth looking at. I was just thinking on the way down here how when I was young and when you were young as well.
I remember that.
President Kennedy made it part of the goal to get a man on the moon. And a lot of people at the time probably thought that was over-ambitious and it couldn't be done, but by devoting a lot of resources and attention to it, they did it. I think it's the same with renewable resources, natural resources, that if we did focus enough attention on doing this and appropriate resources, if it was important enough to us, we could get a lot faster with this than we are getting.
I definitely agree. But, you know, I'd have to look at each
Sure.
thing, you know, see whether they actually work or not, and
Of
whether,
course,
you know,
of
what
course. You don't
do
wanna
more
get-
damage than good.
You don't want to just jump on something because it sounds good and then
Yeah.
find out that it has other detrimental effects that you hadn't considered.
Yeah, and government has a bad tendency to do that.
There's a tendency there, yeah, and it is a bad tendency.
Yeah. Now, if I were running for treasurer or something like that, I'd probably favor putting some resources into some alternative fuels. But I'm not running for treasurer.
Yeah, nor am I.
But I would be willing to look at, you know, like I said, geothermal sounds like a good idea. I'd probably be willing to work along those lines. I don't see using our public lands for any of the others. So, do you have something that you would be interested in pushing or not?
In terms of energy,
Yeah, 'cause we do need energy.
of course we do. Well, hydro is a big
Yeah.
part of energy here in Oregon, and I think that's something worth relying on. In fact, I think some of the power that we generate is being sold elsewhere. I might be mistaken on that, but I think that's
Probably.
true. So Oregon is in a better position than a lot of states to be able to generate more than it does, and I think solar has a role. The energy efficiency has a
Yeah.
neglected role. If you converted a lot of buildings to being more efficient, we could use a lot less energy than we do. I think there's a role for public transportation to get people out of their cars. I took the train down here today. It was actually a bus, but I'm going back on a real train, which I prefer. And I walked the rest of the way. It'd be nice if we were able to get places, especially people that have mobility problems, could get places more easily without having to rely on transportation modes that rely a lot on fossil fuels.
And there, you know, like nothing I can do about it as Secretary of State, but I'm a firm believer that if they wanted to, especially like in the cars, you know, I like cars. I don't drive, but I like them.
I was born and raised around Detroit, Michigan, so I know something about the car industry.
But they could be a whole lot more efficient. They could get a whole lot more gas miles. I see these advertisements for trains. They say, well, we get 400 miles to a gallon. If you can get 400 miles to a gallon, well, you should be able to get at least that much for a car.
Yeah. Part of the problem is getting consumers to make that choice too, because when gas prices go low, they start buying the bigger, more energy inefficient vehicles like the SUVs. So how you resolve that problem, I think, is just creating cities and transportation modes that make it easier for people to let go of the cars. I think the younger generation understands this, and they're willing to do that. They're moving into cities, and they want to live in a lifestyle where they don't have to own cars if they're not necessary. They can share rides, they can use public transportation. And I think we should be thinking about their future as well. If this is what they want, these are the kind of things we should be putting into place for them. I don't think we listen to them nearly enough.
But, you know, like I said, I think if they really wanted to, the cars could get a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
they should be getting 400 or 500
Yeah,
miles
they've
to
almost
the
had to be
gallon.
dragged kicking and screaming into
Yeah,
that.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not been a priority.
Okay, we've got a little over 4 minutes left in the program. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Well, of course, I want to promote my candidacy, and if people would like to learn more about me and my positions, they can go to www.voteforallen.org for organizations. So that's vote, V-O-T-E, for, F-O-R, Allen, A-L-A-N.org.
Okay, and while he's doing that, keep in mind Michael Marsh for Secretary of State. I don't have a website yet, but probably will.
You have a TV show.
I do have a TV show, so you'll be seeing me again.
So look, they have two good choices here, right?
Yeah.
So there's more than just the two major parties. There's other parties there to consider.
Yeah.
And even if you choose in the end not to vote for us for one reason or another, I think it's important that we get other ideas out there, that people should be able to hear other voices, because there's so many things happening that the major parties don't seem to be addressing well. The competition from outside will force them to look at those things.
Yeah, and when you look at the Democrat and the Republican Party this year especially, okay, you have Hillary Clinton, who's very corrupt, and the corruption didn't just start last year. It's been, forever. And then you have Donald Trump, who at the best is a jerk. And that's the choice they tell you have. And some of the two-party candidates are lower levels, And if you don't like having to choose between a Donald Trump or a Hillary Clinton, now is the time to actually start looking at third parties, and whoever you agree with, like if you agree with me, vote for me, and I hope you do. If you agree with Alan Moore, then vote for him. And I'll have some other third-party candidates on during the election cycle. And, study these people, study us, and vote who, Ted Cruz got booed for saying vote your conscience, but
I think that's good principle.
very good principle.
Yeah.
And, I wouldn't have voted for Ted Cruz because he's not a natural born citizen, and I believe in the Constitution, but he was right. You got to vote who you believe will advance the country and the state, in my case, in our case. And so I hope you will do that, study us and vote for who you want.
Mm-hmm.
There's a early 20th century socialist that I don't particularly care for, but he made it was Eugene Debs.
I know of him.
And he made a very profound statement. He said, it is better to vote for what you want and not get it than to vote for what you don't want and get it.
Get it, yeah.
Yeah.
So no matter who wins, they should also be continuing to speak out for the things they think are important and not feel like their voice has been lost. It's easy to get discouraged, but change is possible.
Yeah, and we have to make that change. And we have to get out of that idea that, there's only two parties.
And election reform. Reform the election so people aren't herded into those parties without considering the alternatives.
Yeah. Now we have 30 seconds left. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we go?
In 30 seconds? Well, thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things with you, and I've enjoyed it. And I wish you luck in your bid, and I hope that your party is able to get people to listen more than they might have in previous years.
Thank you. And I agree. And I'm hoping people will listen to you, what you have to say, and listen to me, and listen to the other candidates, and vote for the one they think will be best rather than one that will do the least harm. And look for who's going to do the most good. Thank you.
Thank you.